So we are now progressing through our NoSQL exercise. Previously, we created a database, an AdventureWorks product bill of materials database, and DynamoDB. And recall that DynamoDB is an example of a document store database, much different from a relational database. The only metadata, if you'll recall, when you did the create of the table that you specified was the key, which is the unique identifier. So this is similar to a relational database. Each item, what they call rows in a relational database, they call items in DynamoDB, is going to have a unique identifier. But that's it as far as metadata is concerned, and you could have any other kind of fields, if you will, or attributes that you like, and you don't have to declare them ahead of time. As a matter of fact, some items can have some attributes and other items might not have those attributes, as long as they all have the key. So in our first little script, we created the table. In our second script, we did a little bit of data manipulation on it. And now what we're going to do is we're going to populate this AdventureWorks product database with data that's from that JSON file that we had used in the previous visualization Python exercise. So you should be somewhat familiar with it. That's this one right here, this AWBOM. This is what it looks like in Notepad++. And remember, if I just copy it, and I'm going to put it into pretty print, and we're just going to go ahead and paste it. And you can see that what we have here is an array of, and you can see it's an array because you got the square braces, of these JSON objects, and each JSON object consists of some key value pairs. This is the name of the property or the attribute, this is the value of it. So we get the product ID, the product name, etc. And we had done stuff with the visualizations to keep statistics about how many of a particular category there was, or what the average list price or something of that nature. That's what we did with the visualization. One thing we had not done is delved into the bill of materials. And the bill of materials is actually a hierarchy. And in your textbook, in Chapter 2, they talk about bill of materials. And in Chapter 4, they talk about bill of materials. It's a very common thing when you have products, you're manufacturing products, because you have a product and it's made up of pieces. That in turn is made up of pieces, etc. So we're going to be working with this hierarchical data this time as we move forward through this NoSQL exercise. But our purpose for today is simply to take this data and populate the DynamoDB database with it. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up the idle shell. And what we'll do is we'll make a script file. And again, the purpose of this script file is to read from the JSON file and to populate the DynamoDB database with that data. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new file. And JSON to DynamoDB. And I'm going to need to do some imports here. So I'm going to go ahead and import JSON. You remember you had to do that before. That was in the visualization. We haven't had to do that yet for the NoSQL because we haven't really been trying to do stuff with it, or were we? I don't remember. Anyways. And then also import Boto3. That's going to give us connectivity to your AWS services. And I'm going to make a resource. And I'm going to get the table for that resource. We've done all this before. And if all is well and good, I should be able to run this. So let's try doing that. And I run it and I get no errors. And I should be able to see this table. And there it is, my AW product BOM table. If you had successfully created a table in the first exercise, then you should be able to see that. So now, what I would like to do is basically do the same thing we did to loop through the JSON objects that were in this array of JSON objects. And recall that in order to do that, we had to open the file and read the data in, and a JSON array winds up being a Python list, and a JSON object winds up being a Python dictionary. So we're going to have a list of dictionaries as a result of doing this. So let's do it. I'm going to just put something, I'm going to say open JSON file, and I'm going to say, and by the way, that JSON file is also stored in this temp folder. It's got to be stored along with your Python file, so remember that. So you can download it from Canvas. So I'm going to go ahead and open it with open, and the name of the file was awbom.json as we'll call it JSON file. So the opening will give us this thing called JSON file. And I'm going to now load data from the file. And there is, in the JSON module, there is a function called load, and I can give it JSON file, which is this variable that is basically the connector to the file, and I should be able to do this without any problem. And if I do, I'll go ahead and run it and see if I was able to do such a thing. And I was. And as a matter of fact, if I want to see what JSON file looks like, well, first of all, what is JSON file itself? It's an I/O wrapper. So this is kind of like dealing with streams from data files. If you've done text file I/O in Java, same sort of thing happening here. By the way, I forgot to actually put it into a variable, so I'm going to say data equals JSON load. Let me run it again. Now, what is data? Data is a big, huge thing, because that's a big file. 9,682 lines. Well, what do you think you got in here? Let me kind of do a copy, and I'll put it into maybe Notepad, and I'll paste it. And what do we have? What we have here, essentially, is a list of dictionaries. We have one for each of the products. So we've taken the JSON data, which was an array of JSON objects, and we made a list of dictionaries out of it. And now we can loop through the data and do stuff with it. And we did something very similar before. So I'll do it here. And I'm going to have a loop for P in data. So each dictionary in that list is a dictionary about a product. So that's why I said for P. And I'm going to print the information about the product. And I'll go ahead and do a print. Print P product ID. So I'm going to get the product ID property of this dictionary, and then I'm going to get the product name. I'll get a few of them out here just to print them. The product name, product category. I might as well go ahead and print out a bunch of information about it. And then the product subcategory. And the list price. This will be the list price. And let's just to kind of keep it from going too long, I'm just going to go once through the loop and I'll break for now. So I'm going to break out of that loop after printing the first one out. If I've done this correctly, then I should get one thing printed out. Oops, I've done this incorrectly. Why? Print, oh, because this is supposed to begin with an open parent. And try it again. And we'll do OK. Oh, list price. See, I got an error here, interestingly enough. This was a key error. And why did I get this key error? Because there is no list price with a capital R. So we had an exception. Let me try running it. And there it is. So we had our very first product, 994. It's an L bottom bracket. It's in the components category. Bottom brackets subcategory, and that's its list price. And if I take out the break and I run it again. Oh, by the way, before I do that, let's just take a look at what P had in it. So P was this reference to the very first product, and P has all of that stuff. And I believe P also has a bill of materials. There's a BOM, which itself is a list of subcomponents. And some of those subcomponents might also have BOMs, which themselves are lists of subcomponents. So as I said, you have this kind of a hierarchy thing going on. Now we're going to visualize that eventually. So let me go ahead and run it again. I'm going to kill this shell, and I'll go ahead and run this in a new shell. And there we have all of our products being listed out. So now what I'd like to do is I'd like to populate the database. And we have access to that database. We have that table. It's there still. We haven't made use of it. But we have that table. And now let's start to populate the table. So I'm going to just go ahead and put a comment here. Populate the DynamoDB table. And remember there was a put item. I'm just going to go ahead to my PowerPoint here. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to copy this text. So this is our put item method of that table class. And I'm going to go ahead and paste it into here, and let me put it in the right level of indentation. And of course, what I want in product ID is not an X, and I don't really want an other stuff. What I really want to do is to put in product ID, the product ID, and in product name, the product name, but I also want to put the category and the subcategory and the bill of material. So I'm going to do that. So for product ID, I'm going to take the value of that particular, now we're at a particular dictionary in that list because we were looping through the list. So, and I'm going to take the product name, and we're not going to have something called other stuff. I was just doing that to give examples previously. Forget this other stuff. But we are going to have things like category. So let me just kind of copy these. Now, these fields here are not defined in the metadata. There's no such field defined in the metadata of subcategory, but still you can put them in. An item can have anything you want in it. And then the list price. And also what we want is the bill of materials, which is this whole hierarchy of things. So I'm going to make a bill of materials one. And if I've done things the way I want to, oh, this parent goes here too, because that's part of this. Unless I syntaxed or something. I can tell you right off the bat, before I'm gonna warn you, we're gonna get an error. But hopefully we won't get an error until we've actually populated a few things. So I'm gonna try and run it again. So once again, I'm reading the JSON file into a list of dictionaries. I'm looping through that list. For each dictionary, I'm printing out some information about it, and then I'm trying to insert an item into the DynamoDB table. So I'm going to run it. And I have an error here. Well, wait a second. What's this error? Oh, the BOM should have had BOM, not list price. Let's try that. Still getting an error. Floats types are not supported. I'll have to stop this thing. Well, as we saw from last time, I ran into an error that I wasn't expecting, and so when that happens, what do you got to do? You got to do some debugging. And I'm looking down here at this error down right here at the bottom. It says, float types are not supported, use decimal types instead. And it looks like it's coming from something in Boto 3. So apparently DynamoDB doesn't like float types for some reason, at least from Python, doesn't like Python float types. So let me take a look and see what I have here. Again, we have our P reference variable, which is referencing this latest dictionary that we were trying to insert that data into DynamoDB. And so I'm going to take a look and see what is P. And there's P again. It's this dictionary that has the product. And if I was going to say P list price, it is $53.99. And if I want to know what the data type of that is, there is a function in Python called type. Hopefully you had encountered it at some point in 221. You probably did, but maybe you haven't really remembered it. And I'm going to copy this and paste it in here. And lo and behold, it is a float. And DynamoDB doesn't like floats. Well, it says it right here. And so what do I do when I run into something that I'm not really familiar with? Obviously, I Google it. And so I Googled it. And when I Googled it, I came up with a couple of things here. I looked up float, Python, DynamoDB, and hunted around a little bit. And I came to this particular link right here. And what does it say? AWS Software Development Kit for Python doesn't support float types, and you should use decimal instead. But when we loaded from JSON into the dictionary, those numeric JSON types by default get loaded as floats. However, there are ways that you can mitigate that, and one was right here. Looks like that JSON.loads function has some optional arguments to them where you can specify some things. As a matter of fact, I hunted around a little bit more and I came to this site right here, and this site right here is telling us some arguments to that JSON.load, and one of them is the parse float argument, and there's another one called parse int. And so what this particular site said to do was to use that argument and to say anything that comes in as a float, we're going to convert into a decimal. And in order to do that, we need to be making use of this package right, this module right here, which is, I believe, embedded within Python. You don't have to actually install it. And from that particular module, we're going to import the decimal class. So I'm going to just do that. So I'm going to copy this from here, And I'm going to put it into my imports. So in addition to importing photo3, I'm going to import that. So I have now another module that I'm importing, and from that module I'm importing the decimal class, and I will just take this code right here, and I'm going to copy it, and where I'm calling my json.load, I'll paste this. This is an example of an optional argument, and it's a named argument. Remember, in Python, you can be giving arguments in the proper order, or you can be giving some arguments and not others, especially if they're optional. And for these optional arguments, oftentimes you will name it. And this is one of the nice features that Python has. So now we're specifying that when we load the JSON data, we're going to be loading decimals and not floats. So I'm going to go ahead and try and run that and see what happens. Let me kill this one. So much of coding is experimentation. We run into a stumbling block, and then what do we have to do? We got to fix that stumbling block. We go off on a tangent to fix that stumbling block, and then we come back and we continue pursuing our ultimate objective. So I'm going to run the module. And it looks like it's doing stuff. That's good. So it looks like we don't have that problem anymore. But as I told you before, we are going to run into an error. And we run into this error here because, well, I got another key error. And I got another key error on BOM. So this was line 29. And 29 is where I'm trying to put the BOM in my put item. Looks like I was able to put a lot of items in there, right? But when I came to here, I had an error. Well, let's take a look at that particular P. Because at this point, we have a P, it aborted. We have a P here that's pointing at, I would assume this one right here, this chain components, this chain product, which is in the components category. So I'm going to say P, and here it is a chain, and the list price is a decimal note. See how list price is now specifically a decimal, which is because of what we did before. And then, but notice there is no BOM. Well, as it turns out, some products don't have a bill of material. So I didn't have a bill of material. And so when I tried to get the bill of material key, I got a key error. Well, what does that tell me? Sometimes I'm going to have to deal with with not having a bill of material. So what am I going to do in that case? Well, I think what I'm going to do in that case is I'm going to, if I do get an exception, I'm going to do something else instead. So this is your typical kind of try and catch sort of thing. And in the syntax of Python, it's try and then except. So let's do that. I know you learned a little bit about this in 221. You may not remember the syntax specifically. And those of you who are majors have certainly done that in 331 as well, try and catch. So we're going to be doing exception handling here. So I'm going to do a try. I'm putting it right here in the put item. Oh, no, I don't want to put it here. Sorry, excuse me. I want to put it above the put item. So I'm going to do a try. And I'll go ahead and indent this because that's part of the try block now. And then when you have an exception, the syntax in Python is the word except. In Java, it would be the word catch. And whatever kind of exception I get, I'm not going to worry about it. Any kind of an exception. This is a general exception. I could be very specific. Actually, this was really specifically a key error, but I think we'll be safe to assume here that if there's an exception, it's probably a key error. Okay. So what's going to happen is if I do that, then I think, first of all, I want to show that it doesn't have a bill of material. So I'm going to go ahead and do this. I'm going to say print, and then a little error message here, or a message. Item has no BOM. And so that will do that. But I think in addition to that, well, let me just run it. And let's see what happens this time. I'll kill the shell again. Let me just run it. And you can see, looks like we're not going to have, okay, doing okay. Well, see, a few of them come out saying they don't have no BOM, but we didn't stop us from continuing. There's quite a few items that don't have bill of materials, right? So there's a lot of items that don't have bill of materials. But at least we were able to go through all of them. But we haven't actually populated the table with those items that don't have a BOM. So I think I'd like to put whatever data we do have into that table. So I'm going to do another put item that's just like this one. Only I'm just not going to include the BOM. And let's see what happens now. By the way, let me see what happens here. Remember the client, the Boto client? Boto3.client DynamoDB. And then I'm going to try this. List tables. Is my syntax right? Oops. Yes, that method does exist, but I didn't call it. I just referenced it. I have to call it. How do I call a method? I have to put the open parent, close parent. And what to do here? Table names. Oh, that was list tables. Actually, that wasn't really what I wanted to do. What I wanted to do was look at the table and item count. Oops. Table dot item count. And it still says 0. Isn't that weird? There was definitely data in there, but for some reason it still says 0. I'm going to try to run it again. I think what's happening is that it somehow keeps that value in cache. I'll bet I know why that was. I'll bet it's because I didn't refresh the variable. But now if I say table.item count, I bet it's going to have a count. So let's take a look. Table.item count. It still says 0, oddly enough. But there's data in there for sure. How do I know there's data in there? Well, I'm going to do a get. I'm going to try and get one of these records. And let me go to the PowerPoint and do the get. Maybe not in the PowerPoint. Yeah, I guess in the PowerPoint. Let me go and get that get syntax here. So I'm going to do this. And I don't want X and Z. Let's try, let's do 823, which was the LL mountain rear wheel. So I'm going to copy that, and that's going to be the name of the product. And let's see what I get here. And let's take a look at response. Well, response is showing that there's an item, all right. Response has more than the item. Remember, we had sent a request. This get item, there was a bunch of stuff having to do with the response itself, but the most important one was item. Maybe I just want to type in response. This is response gave me a dictionary, as you can see, curly braces. So I want to get just that first attribute, the item attribute, item, and there you have it. So definitely there's data in that table. I'll bet if we went out of the shell and we came back in a few minutes later, we'd see that there was an item count of however many products that we have. If you've done that, just do one more thing here, let's try another get here, and we'll try another item, maybe the rear brakes, okay, which looks like rear brakes doesn't have a bill of material. Well, let's take a look and see if that's true. So I'm going to copy this product ID into here, and the name of the product, which was rear brakes, and And rear brakes is part of the components category, and as the subcategory is brakes, and that's its price, $106. And I'm going to change this to that. Let's make it response 2. So I'll have a response 2, and response 2 item. And there it is. And notice there's no bill of materials for that particular product. But as you can see, we have populated that table. And if you got to this point, then you have accomplished the task for this third script file. So now there's 3 script files. One was for creating the table in the first place. One was for experimenting with some data manipulation. And then the last one, well, not the last one, but the third one here is for actually populating it with stuff that we read from the JSON file. And of course, there's still more to come.